Hi, my name's Braxton Montier. I'm interviewing Nicole Herway here for UFLTV. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nicole Herway. I'm a therapist in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I work with relationship trauma and divorce counseling.
Wonderful. Well, I have a couple of questions for you. So
Mhm.
let's hop into those. My first question is, you hear the term parental alienation used a lot in child custody disputes. Is there a formal definition of this term in the mental health profession?
There is no official diagnosis for this dynamic, and in the world, we typically use more the term resist refuse dynamics
Okay.
because knowing if alienation is actually occurring is pretty hard to prove. And so the focus is on the child, where if they're having a resist refuse dynamic, that's really what we want to focus on. And then as a byproduct, once we work on the dynamic, parents tend to improve as well. So the resist refuse dynamic keeps it child centered.
Well, great. Um, is there a difference between, I know parental alienation is hard to prove. You also hear the term parental estrangement. Is there a difference between these two terms? Uh,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah. So alienation is more about like bad mouthing and like superimposing one's belief onto someone else. So it can happen in a lot of places, like at work, right? You could be alienated from your coworkers because they're being poorly spoken of. So, at least as a
yeah,
therapist, I kind of focus more on the bad mouthing and the attitude behind it than the outcome. Estrangement is more when someone pulls away for reasonable reasons. So, a lot of times there's parental estrangement when um, like let's say for example, and I always tell people I'm going to call it the preferred parent and the rejected parent. A lot of people, you'll catch me going, mom or dad, but they're interchangeable because the more research we have, it shows that this kind of resist refuse dynamic can happen towards a mom or a dad. um, but the let's say the child has just spent a lot of time with the preferred parent, has a stronger relationship with the preferred parent, and maybe witnessed some maltreatment of their preferred parent by the rejected parent. And so they might pull towards the preferred parent, not because of any behaviors on the part of the preferred parent, but simply just because the child over time has a preferred parent, right? And so the
yeah.
estrangement is for a reason, like, yeah, reasons that make sense. So it could be lack of connection, it could be emotional neglect, it could go so far as domestic violence, but estrangement is actually more common to work with than full blown like bad mouthing from one parent to the other. But lots of kids have preferences. It's normal.
Oh. So so you said it was really hard to determine if parental alienation is occurring and proving it. How would you prove it? What are the kind of ways that you would be able to prove that if you were able to get like a perfect, this is what's happening? Yeah,
Yeah, like this case is really obvious.
yeah,
Again, I think even pursuing the idea of trying to prove parental alienation isn't as useful as trying to prove intent and effort to improve the relationship. So even if I'm working with a family where one party is trying to prove that they're being alienated by the other party, in therapy, I'd still have them focus on the child and what the child is comfortable with. And if the child is pulling away from one parent, again, it's kind of hard to know why and building a sense of trust with the child. And so I think it's more effective to show good faith effort to speak well of each other. So, as representation, again, I can't speak for attorneys, but it's much easier to find ways that people are supporting each other and speaking well of each other than it is to try to strip someone down. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So how often do you find the preferred and refused parent kind of dynamic in a custody dispute?
Ooh, that's a good question. Initially, it would probably be higher. And then there's two kind of trajectories families go. As they do family therapy, the dynamic can either soften, right, with
Hmm.
effective therapy and also involvement from the two parties, um, or it can actually exacerbate. And so I don't know any specific numbers about it, and I'm just one clinician, but I would say for me, what I pay attention more to is the trajectory. So as they're working with me in family therapy, are they moving towards softening and starting to speak better of each other and coming up with creative ways to spend time with the kid or to attach to the child. For example, if we're working with a case where let's say dad was poorly treated by mom. And so dad is the preferred parent, mom is the rejected parent. If mom really exacerbates her behavior and is like really demanding, like, I have to see my kid, I have a right to my kid, it's probably going to make the kid even pull away less because some of those harsh behaviors aren't
Yeah.
going to make the kid want to go. So it's much better if the family can be creative and say, I understand that right now spending time with me isn't your cup of tea, and that's okay. What if I just send you funny YouTube videos for the next couple weeks and you can tell me what you liked about them and we'll just talk on the phone, right? So if there's more respect towards the child, a lot of times there's a softening both by the preferred parent and the rejected parent. But if they continue to stay harsh and demanding and wanting to like prove their point and ruin each other's reputation, like the dynamics actually perpetuate and exacerbate. So it doesn't really do anyone any good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. If one parent is just sitting there bad mouthing the other and not actually working to get better or trying to help the dynamic in any way, I can see that it would just go way off into the end zone, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll have cases where one parent's like, I'm being alienated, and the other one's like, I'm being alienated. And you're like, what if we just start with focusing on the things you do agree on or you do like? So you both agree your kid is cool. Good.
Yeah.
That's a starting point, right? So again, it's one of those things where a lot of times I'll see both parties claiming the other one is perpetuating the resist refuse dynamics. And my job as a therapist is to say, we could focus on all the problems. And if we look for problems, we'll find them. Or we
Yeah.
can focus on strengths and positive things and start to, again, shift the culture of your co-parenting dynamic where it's not accusatory or blaming, but rather trying to find like where the two Venn diagrams can overlap and what we do agree on.
Yeah. So for the resist refuse dynamic and the preferred and rejected parent, um, how does therapy deal with that? What kind of specific therapy kind of mends that distance?
Yeah, so family systems therapy has gotten a lot of attention, and I think it's a very valid and useful therapy. There's also a lot of other ones like solution focused brief therapy, structural family therapy, Bowenian family therapy. There's actually quite a lot of varieties. One of the concerns about using only family systems therapy is there's something called circular causality, meaning that whenever there's an issue in the family, we tend to look at the contribution of both parties to the dynamic. But when you look at things like resist refuse dynamics, sometimes we have one parent really trying to speak well of the parent, encourage the kids to go. But if the kid really doesn't want to go, like the kid just really doesn't want to go, right? And so the
Yeah.
other parent will claim parental alienation when the other parent's like, I'm honestly speaking very well of you and trying to get them ready and out the door. But also, what you can have is if you push the dynamic too much, the child will start to reject both parents and not want to go to either of them because they're being told that they don't have a choice in what they do. So again, rather than focusing on any specific technique, it's more just relationship rebuilding, where both parents need to soften, pull away from the accusatoriness and say, what's our main goal here? Our main goal is for our kid to wake up, be able to focus at school, not have their stomach hurt because of stress, be able to eat some food, hang out with some friends, and go home. So, again, if that means that I FaceTime my kid once a week for a couple of months and just send them letters in order to kind of pull away from the intensity of the situation, in the long run, that may be better because then the child's able to rebuild both relationships with both parents if that's feasible. Or if there really is one parent that's the rejected parent because of choices of the rejected parent, such as being unsafe, driving too fast, not feeding them healthy food, ignoring them on screen time. That's one thing we see a lot in family therapy is like maybe for a while it is a good idea for the kid to get a break and kind of get in a good rhythm of thing. And then when the rejected parent shows healthier behaviors, they can start to come in more to the child's life at a like healthy pace rather than trying to force a child to go with a parent they just really don't want to go with.
That makes a lot of sense. Um,
Mhm.
when you're engaging in therapy, what do you need to do to make it be successful? Because a lot of people who end up in therapy in a divorce situation are court ordered to be there. And you don't want somebody who's sitting on the couch just looking at the clock, like, look, I'm here to check a box, just trying to run the timeout. What if you're really invested and you want therapy to be successful, how do you do so?
Yeah, the number one thing I would say is please be creative. If you come into therapy and you're expecting a specific outcome, it's most likely not going to happen. And that goes for both parties. So let's say mom comes in and she's like, I think this should be the schedule and the way that it works. And dad comes in, or mom, right? Whatever the family dynamic is. Let's do
Yeah,
mom and mom. So let's say that both moms are coming in saying, like, this is what it should be. And the other one's saying, no, this is what it should be. And then tension, right? So what I
yeah,
say is we call this psychotherapy of the absurd, which means like try to just think of terrible ideas that you both agree are terrible. So one of them would be like sending the kid to Antarctica to live among penguins. Again, I'll be a bit facetious, but I'm trying to do them to show that they actually agree more than they think, right?
yeah,
So they both want the kid to go to school. Maybe they disagree on the school, but they both agree that the kid is actually a third grader and not secretly a junior in high school. So cool.
yeah,
Third grade. So now we're looking at third grade options. Sweet. Everybody agrees he's into robotics. Great, let's do robotics. One parent might want him to do karate, the other one might want him to do something else. There's a lot of tension. But if you can help them realize that we won't get the outcome, it seems the same in law. Again, I'm no attorney, but you're not going to get the outcome every detail that you wanted to begin with. But if you can start to be creative and say what matters most to you, maybe that he participates in STEM activities. What's most important to me that he goes to bed at 7:30, right? Um, a lot of parents in the beginning really, really want 50-50 because they're afraid that they'll look like a bad parent if they don't have 50-50. But I'm always so proud of people when they're like, you know what? 50-50 actually doesn't work because I'm 30 minutes away from the school in year two. Like it makes more sense for you to take them to and from school. And then maybe I could have like a Wednesday evening to do like mom night or something like that. And
yeah.
so if people can be creative and think outside the box, they actually come up with really good parenting plans and feel really supported in the co-parenting relationship rather than being really rigid and black and white in how they think.
Yeah, you could do something that isn't a traditional 50-50. You know,
Yeah.
somebody has more evenings or more mornings, or like your kid has to get to school, like you mentioned, if one parent's 30 minutes away and the other's two, like the, the child should probably do and go to school from that house more
Yeah.
often. But you can make up the time. Maybe you get more weekends or something. So
Yeah.
you could still get 50-50. You just would have to be, like you said, creative on how that solution would work.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe even say like it's not 50-50 on overnights. Like that might be what the law says, but I'm just looking to feel like I'm involved with my kid. I know what their friends are like. I have a lot of clients who don't have 50-50. They have more like 65-35. And they say they actually feel more involved in their kids' lives because they pick them up after school and they do the after school hours, right? I have one that's what he does. He picks them up at 3, they hang out till mom's off work at 5:30, and then they go back. But he's like, guess what? I get all the stories and he loves it. So he doesn't have the equal number of overnights, right? Because that's what the court is looking at is overnights. But we're just looking at
Yeah.
relationship. And he really feels like he has like a 50-50 relationship. And that's more important than any like check mark box of who slept where.
Yeah. All right. Next question is the reject and refusal kind of attitude and the preferred and rejected parent. Um, how does this factor into a custody evaluation? That's a big hot topic in divorce is getting a custody evaluation because they are expensive. And there are a lot of attorneys that are either for or against, and they're very like there's no real middle ground for
Yeah.
some of these people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, a lot honestly depends on who the custody evaluator is, how well they were trained, and how they do their job. So, if you have a custody evaluator who's just like watching a kid for 10 minutes in only one home and doesn't do a very thorough job, like you're not going to have the same depth of information to pull an evaluation on. Also, it's literally impossible to not include bias into evaluations because we're humans, we're not robots. So that's
yeah,
also something to consider is there's an inherent bias to a custody evaluation. So I think a lot of the responsibility falls on evaluators to try to account for their own bias to do a very thorough job. And then also for the people that are looking at the evaluation to try to be kind of like a checks and balances type of system where they can say, this is what the evaluation said, but this is what the kid is saying, and this is what mom is saying. So let's look at the whole picture rather than just saying, well, that's what the custody evaluator said, so that's what we're doing, right? Like,
Yeah.
again, it can be an additional source of support, but using it at the exclusion of all else would not be wise.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want somebody who, like you said, came in, kind of watched for 10 minutes, collected their like $8,000 paycheck, and then said, "All right, well, here's the form that I have that I filled out that made a 40-page thing. So here you go." Yeah, that would be terrible, especially if you find out like if I were the dad in the situation and I find out, oh yeah, I just paid 8 grand for somebody who did 10 minutes worth of work and didn't actually do anything. I mean, I think both people would be frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a tendency, as we all do, to rubber stamp. We try to make things generic. So sometimes, again, bias, right? A really good custody evaluator may not be able to fully check their own bias. And sometimes, as humans, we see a situation that we saw 3 years ago and we assume it's the same thing. But again, that's literally impossible, as everybody is different, every family is different. Even if there are some similarities, the recommendations wouldn't be the same. The thing that's great about custody evaluations is that it is another view of the family and probably the most systemic view of the family because you have someone who's an impartial third party who's observing and watching and making observations. So if it does ever go to trial, I hope, the people making decisions, the commissioners, the judges, whoever's involved, I hope that they would, you know, read it and value it and weigh it, but also remember to look at all the other information as well.
Yeah. Um, and on the other side of the custody evaluator kind of thing, the person who actually does a good job, is it easy to fool them? I know that given enough time, people eventually lose whatever kind of lies that they're hiding behind. Eventually the mask falls away. But, if you're in between, sometimes they don't actually observe long enough for the mask to fall away. So is it easy to fool an evaluator and kind of lie about the dynamic?
If you are that talented, you can fool anyone, right? And that's part of it is a lot of these people enter into these relationships that are extremely unhealthy because of the deceit and the deceptive nature of it and of the
Yeah,
person. So I'm gonna just assume most people are good, they have
yeah,
wounds and they struggle and we all have our own issues. But I think that there are people that are very adept at making people believe them. And so again, no one is immune to being manipulated.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I would also agree that most people could get tricked. Nobody is foolproof. That's
Mhm.
just kind of a general rule of humanity is we're all different. We all have
Yeah,
a different kind of tolerance for it.
yeah.
So, um, do you ever get the impression that a when you're sitting down with a family for therapy, you ever get the impression that one parent is trying to play you off of each other and make them really good and the other one really bad? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Triangulation's always normal, and we account for that. We
yeah,
assume, I think there was one study done that 81.1% of clients lied to their therapists. So when I walk into a session, I just assume I'm already being played and lied to. Not because I think people are bad, but just because, again, it allows me to check my own biases. So, a lot of things that I look for, right, rather than focus on am I being manipulated or triangulated, is just not entering the dynamic at all. It's
yeah,
really to focus on let's be creative. And if someone keeps going back to something, I might say to them, well, you really just kind of want that thing to happen. So, and then we play it out like if what you wanted were to happen, what would that look like? Kind of soften their ego a little bit and then try to bring them back in. But I will say, there's like a joke in family therapy and in all therapy that we don't have magic wands that we use. So a lot of times we'll get a case and they'll say, do this, or this is the outcome we want, or fix this family, or fix this person, or whatever. And it's hard because our job is just honestly provide the most favorable climate for change as therapists. So we try to make the office very direct, very clear, very kind, very respectful. Sometimes I'm modeling for people how we need them to act as co-parents. And the hope is that they will kind of reflect or mirror that behavior. But at the same time, like I've worked with many people who just really don't want to have a better life. They would like to stay angry. They would like to continue to badmouth the other parent. They would like to still put themselves in the victim role. And that might just be where they're at right now. So we all do our best, but we can't force people to change. And I always tell people, like, even if this round of therapy didn't have the outcome you were looking for, maybe let's give it a little bit of time and try again, right? Like, I'd rather have you keep trying and keep coming back than do therapy for like a glorious 12 sessions and expect yourself to be magically healed. Like, you know,
Yeah.
systemic change takes time.
Yes, it does. Um, you mentioned kind of earlier that you'll get a case from the court, or you'll get they'll say, "Hey, this is the outcome that we want," or something like that. Do you ever get the impression that the courts are kind of just dumping family dysfunction onto therapists? I mean, as a you do a wheelbarrow motion to kind of emphasize, but um, there is a problem with certain families. But do you ever really get the impression that they're just like, all right, well, this will be good for me if I just say, well, go to therapy. Like,
Mm,
yeah, do you ever think that the court's just like, okay, well, maybe the therapist will sort it out?
I think there's hope behind that, right? So I don't
Yeah,
feel the sense of dumping. In fact, I probably would probably feel more like I'm opening up my Santa Claus satchel and I'm like, yeah, go ahead. Like, let's see. We'll just see, right?
yeah.
And so I do think that when they pass on a case, it's an act of hope, saying we've gone as far as we can go with the skills and the parameters that we work in as the law. And so they're trying to involve another angle to try something else. Kind of like if the house is closed and boarded up, you're
Hmm.
going to find a ladder and try to climb up to a high window, or you're going to try to go through the cellar door or something like that. And so that's kind of the view that I have is they're just trying anything that they can think of that may help. And my one hope would be that they would know that just because they sent them to therapy does not guarantee change.
All right. And my last question is you're a court-approved therapist, is that correct?
Sort of. So this is one thing I'm still
Yeah,
learning law stuff just because I have
yeah.
no formal legal training. But obviously once you're involved in the courts, we are called CITs or court involved therapists, meaning we're part of the legal occurrences of what's happening. I do wish we had more law training in our graduate programs so that we could understand a little bit more of the legalese. But my understanding is that it's more the courts have maybe a type of therapy they're recommending, or they may recommend like a certain family practice to go here or find someone like that. So the main thing is you just want to find a good fit. So I always tell people like if I'm not a good fit for your family or you don't like the way that I work, like please go find someone who is a good fit for you because I try to adapt to families, but there's also limitations to either my skill set, my personality just is what it is. So
Yeah.
if it doesn't work for you, like please go find someone where that does work. And then also remember too that no one type of therapy is a magic bullet. Again, if I could educate the courts a bit, that's what I would say is I feel like it's always like family systems therapy, like that's what works. But there's a lot of limitations to every type of therapy. And what matters more is the relationship and the communication and the conversations that we're having in session. So ideally, when I'm working with a person or a family or a couple, I'm not using any one type of modality. I'm actually using many based on what they seem to need. And then the main thing is I'm just building a relationship with them, try to help and lower the reactivity, the aggression, the fear, because when they feel like they actually are heard and understood, they're more likely to change.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was all of my questions. If somebody wanted to reach out to you to schedule therapy with you, how would they do so?
Yeah, so probably look me up online, right? So Nicole Herway is my name. I always tell people it's her way, Herway, like his way, but her way.
Yeah.
And I have a website, it's herwaycounseling.com, or you can email me, Nicole@herwaycounseling.com. And yeah, I like working with people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.